Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a really significant event, the Hamas-led attack on Israel back on October 7th, 2023. We've got excerpts from the Wikipedia article on the attack to work with. So what we're really trying to do is, get a grip on how this complex event went down and what happened after.
Yeah, and complex is an understatement. The scope of this thing, it's really unlike anything we've seen in decades in this conflict.
For sure. Okay, so picture this, right? It's October 7th. It's the Jewish Sabbath, the end of Sukkot. Should be a time for celebration. But instead, bam, over 4,300 rockets raining down on Israel from Gaza. And get this all within the first 20 minutes. This wasn't just some random attack. It was planned, coordinated.
What's crazy is it wasn't just rockets. They planned a ground invasion at the same time. Thousands of Hamas fighters, we're talking maybe 6,000, plus civilians. They bust through the Gaza-Israel barrier. I mean, they were using everything, trucks, bulldozers, even powered paragliders. A total breach.
It's wild. Sounds like something you'd see in a movie, but this was real life and absolutely terrifying. And it wasn't just military targets they were after. They hit 21 Israeli communities and sadly massacre. It's not an exaggeration in this case.
It was a multi-pronged strategy for sure. Rockets caused panic and pulled Israeli defenses in different directions, and then boom, the ground assault. Their goal, to cause chaos and take territory. And for a while they did.
One of the things that just, really sticks with me is the attack on that music festival, the reggae music festival. Can you imagine? You're there to have fun, listen to music with your friends, and suddenly you're fighting for your life. Militants all over, just shooting at everyone.
Yeah, those eyewitness accounts are rough, to say the least. People stuck in their cars, others being hunted down while they were hiding. Over 360 people confirmed dead at that one event alone. And sadly, there is still a lot of missing people. It just shows the pure terror they unleashed, especially on all the young people there.
It's hard to even wrap your head around. And then there's Kfar Aza. It wasn't just a quick in-and-out raid. It took the IDF 2 days to take it back.
Kfar Aza was different. A long, drawn-out fight, really different from the initial speed of the rest of the assault. Over 50 civilians killed. And they took a lot of hostages there. It seems like a different strategy maybe to use as leverage in negotiations later on.
Right. And we can't forget about Be'eri. A much smaller community, but still about a tenth of the people who lived there were killed. 70 militants. They specifically went after this small kibbutz. They even killed a well-known peace activist who lived there. Shows you, no one was safe.
Be'eri really highlights just how brutal and senseless the attacks were. These weren't military targets. They were just normal people, families going about their day when it all started. And this was really just the beginning. The violence didn't stop there, sadly. So, faced with this massive attack, Israel responded with Operation Swords of Iron. Basically, they declared war on Hamas, put Gaza on complete lockdown, and launched airstrikes right away going after Hamas infrastructure and anyone involved. They had to act fast, to regain control and try to take out Hamas' ability to attack.
Yeah, something like this. It's a huge deal on the world stage. You're not going to see everyone agreeing with how Israel responded.
Exactly. A lot of Western countries, the US, UK, most of Europe, they condemned the attacks and said they were with Israel. But some Arab and Muslim countries, they saw it differently. They brought up the whole history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, how Israel's been in control of Palestinian territories for so long, saying that's the root of the problem, the fuel for this cycle of violence.
It's true. You can't ignore that history. It's been going on for decades. It's complicated. But beyond the politics, there were people suffering, caught in the middle of all this, especially with the hostage situation.
Yeah, that was and is a really, really tough part of all this. Hamas took over 2,047 Israelis hostage, brought them back to Gaza, and it wasn't just soldiers captured in the fighting, it was everyday people, families taken from their homes, from their communities, even from that music festival we were talking about. I know, it's just awful, those poor people. They're already dealing with the trauma of the attack, and then they're taken hostage. And weren't their kids taken too?
Sadly, yeah. At least 30 kids were taken hostage. It's a tactic Hamas has used before, sadly. They use hostages as leverage to try and force Israel to release Palestinian prisoners.
Which puts Israel in an impossible position. How do you even begin to negotiate with people who've done something like this, knowing that if you give in, it might just encourage them to take hostages again in the future?
Exactly. A real dilemma with no easy answers. It shows just how difficult the situation is for Israel. And, as bad as all this is, it gets even worse when we look at what Hamas allegedly did during the invasion. We're talking about atrocities here. This is the part, even getting ready for this episode, reading through everything, I have to admit, it was tough. Just the level of brutality, it's hard to even know where to start.
It's definitely something we need to handle carefully, but we also need to be accurate about what happened. We're talking about accusations of really horrific things: sexual assault, torture, mutilation. And in the middle of all the chaos, it's easy for rumors to spread and for the truth to get lost. We have to be careful to separate what we know for sure from what's still being investigated.
You're right, it's not about ignoring the tough stuff, but we have to approach it responsibly. So based on what you found, what can we say for sure about all this? What do we know actually happened?
Well, the sad truth is we do have evidence of terrible violence against Israelis, especially the hostages. Back in March of 2024, a UN report confirmed that there was credible information about hostages being raped and tortured in Gaza. And this wasn't just a one-time thing. We have stories from Israeli soldiers, medical staff who treated survivors, all saying the same thing. The cruelty was just unbelievable.
It's easy to focus on the big picture, the numbers, but we're talking about individual people, each one with their own story, their own pain. And it seems like in all of this, there's a lot of misinformation going around, especially at the beginning.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's where we have to be really careful, think critically about what we're hearing.
Right.
One of the sources we have, this investigation by Hurwitz, they did a good job showing how some of the early reports, often from people who were just trying to help, who were really upset and acting on limited information, they turned out to be false.
Right, like those unverified stories they talk about.
Yeah.
Even some official sources got things wrong early on because they didn't have all the facts yet.
Exactly. And that's why organizations like Hurwitz and these international groups are working so hard to put the pieces together, to separate what really happened from what people thought happened or what they were told happened. It's a huge job, and it'll probably take years to get the whole picture.
It's a good reminder that even when we think we know what happened, we should always be ready to learn more to keep an open mind, especially when we're talking about something as serious and emotional as this. Wow, we've really gone deep on this one. From the initial attack, the global response, those hostages, and then everything that's come out about the atrocities. It's a lot to take in. As we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to remember out of all of this?
With a topic like this, so sensitive, so many emotions involved, I think the biggest takeaway has to be this: you've got to think critically. We can't shy away from the facts, from the suffering that we know happened. But we also can't just believe everything we hear, especially in a conflict like this where everyone has an agenda. That's why those investigations are so important. We need to stay open to new information, understand that what we think we know today might change tomorrow.
And even with all those investigations, there are still so many questions, right? Like,
Yeah.
what happens to those hostages? Can there ever be real justice for what happened?
Those are the questions that stay with you, for sure. The trauma of something like this, the scale of the violence, it's going to have a ripple effect. It'll change how Israelis and Palestinians see each other, how the world reacts. And unfortunately, I think it could lead to more extremism, more division.
It's hard to be optimistic when you put it like that. But I think that's often the case with these deep dives, right? Sometimes the most important thing is to uncover the questions we should be asking, the things we need to keep digging into.
Absolutely. And with this, the question I keep coming back to, the one I hope our listeners will think about too, is where do we go from here? After something like this, does it just make everything worse? Or, and I know this is a long shot, but could it actually somehow push people to talk to each other, to really try to find some kind of peace? It's a tough question, but I think it's one we have to ask.
That's a powerful thought to leave us with. Thanks for walking us through this. It was a tough one, for sure. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and never stop trying to understand, even when things are difficult.